Would you please pray with me? Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable to you, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. It feels like it has been a while, doesn't it? We were plugging down our Matthew road, and then all of a sudden, we took that big detour for like 2 weeks, right? 3 weeks, really. 3 Sundays. Well, you need to forget all that. Forget all that Jesus betrayal stuff. Forget all that Jesus death stuff, Jesus resurrection stuff. None of that has happened yet. No one is thinking about the end of Jesus' life just yet in Matthew chapter 11, our story for today. In fact, you could sort of say that we're kind of still in the honeymoon period with Jesus and his disciples and the religious authorities, where you're early on and everything you just do is amazing, whatever the other one does. Since it has been a while, this morning seems like the perfect time for one of those like flashback beginnings they do at TV shows, where the narrator says something like, previously, in the story of Jesus according to Matthew. After painting a disturbing picture of Jesus' lineage, including some very suspect women, magi from the east come and pay homage to the infant Jesus, rather than the real King Herod. Herod is so infuriated he kills hundreds of tiny children. And then they'd show a picture of like Herod throwing stuff off his walls, right? As an adult, Jesus is baptized by his cousin John, a revolutionary in his own right, one that has infuriated and alienated the religious authorities. After baptism, Jesus teaches the crowds his opening sermon. And there's the picture of him standing on the mountain, right? People were all down below. It's a set of teachings that puts the hammer down on social, racial, and ethnic and any sort of inequality. Jesus confronts some of the basic teachings of the first century church and finishes his teaching about the importance of doing these things. And then Jesus does them and sends his disciples to do the same. And then, of course, this is where it kind of fades out a little bit. And then black screen with the title for our episode for today on, right? We'll get ready for this. This is going to be 24 tomorrow night, the new 24 season. Yeah. All right. Chapter 11 of Matthew. Jack Bauer is not in this chapter. Begins with that John guy who baptized Jesus, right? Only now he's in jail. Nothing in Matthew's gospel about how he got there, but we can put together the pieces. He's in jail because he was leading a religious movement that moved away from the existing structure. Remember back when he called the Pharisees and the Sadducees a brood of vipers? Remember that? Yeah, that sort of behavior has consequences. Shockingly, apparently people in power don't like to be questioned or be called names. Go figure. So John's in jail, in prison, and he wants to know more about the things that Jesus is doing. Apparently he has people that are still loyal to him, and so he sends them to go check up on Jesus. Now John knows who Jesus is for real. At least I'm pretty sure of this fact because it says in that very first verse in chapter 11, when John heard in prison what the Messiah was doing, you see Messiah, that's the key word for me. John knows who Jesus is. He knows that Jesus is the guy, the one they've been waiting for, the one that every Jew had been waiting for. He was the one the world had been waiting for. So these followers of John, they show up to Jesus and they ask him this so simple question, right? Are you the one who is to come? Or are we to wait for another? Messiah talk, right? The one who is to come. That was the Messiah. The Messiah was the one who is to come. Are you the one who is to come, or are we to wait for another? Such a simple question, right? But Jesus just has this inability to answer questions back simply. You would think that they would just ask this question, and he would say, yep, I'm the guy. Are you the one? Absolutely. You found me. Are you the one, they ask? But instead, Jesus says, go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight. The lame walk. The lepers are cleansed. The deaf hear. The dead are raised. And the poor have good news brought to them. And blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. not the answer they were probably hoping for, but wow, isn't that an amazing answer? I love that answer. I mean, the imagery, right? Go and tell what you hear and what you see. So to be clear, this is not about something that's going to happen in the future, right? This isn't about what Jesus is going to do. This isn't about some moment after we die when all this stuff will happen. This is now. These are the things that these followers of John could go and see and hear right now. But do you see the real point of what Jesus is doing here? Do you see the truth in Jesus' response? These followers of John want to know if Jesus is the guy, right? The Messiah, the one they've been waiting for. They want an answer that they can put in their heads. They want the yes. That way they can go knowing, right? Yep, in my head I got it. But Jesus, he tells them it's something they've got to experience. Toy Story 2. Who's seen it? Jacob, Toy Story 2? We lost Jacob. Jacob, have you seen Toy Story 2? Have you seen Toy Story 1? Jacob doesn't know anything about this next part. Toy Story, so who hasn't seen Toy Story? Any of the Toy Story movies? Oh my goodness, shame on you. Oh. So the premise of the Toy Story movies is this little boy, and he actually grows up through the 3 movies. The last one will make you cry, by the way. This boy, Andy, has all these toys. And every time the adults leave the room, the toys come to life, and they get into mischief and fun and games and do all kinds of stuff. Well, in Toy Story 2, correct me if I'm wrong, Jacob, Toy Story 2, this toy collector steals Woody. Woody is the cowboy and like the patriarch of all the toys, the hero of all the toys. This guy comes in and steals him, and he wants to put him together with these other toys and like sell them as a lot. It's real expensive. And so when all the other toys find out that Woody has been stolen, they got to go on a mission to find him, right? Buzz, Rex, Mr. Potato Head, they all got to find Woody and bring him back. And so there's this moment at the end of the movie where the other toys are trying to break into the room where Woody's being held, and they're going through like the heating and cooling ductwork, and there's this metal grate over the end where they can get into the room. And so the one toy is this big dinosaur named Rex, Tyrannosaurus Rex. He's this big dinosaur, but he's got a real squeaky voice. And he's just such a lovable, like playful little character. And he goes, so Buzz is the spaceman. He goes, "What are we gonna do, Buzz?" "Use your head," says Buzz in his Space Ranger voice. And then the next clip is all these toys running, holding Rex in their arms like a battering ram. And while they're running, Rex is yelling, "I don't want to use my head." We use that line around our house for like months after watching that movie. I don't want to use my head. We in the church always want to use our heads. In fact, we get stuck only using our heads. Sometimes faith feels like that's all there is to it, this head stuff. Like, what do you think? What do you believe in your heart or in your head? What do you think about Jesus? What do you think about the Trinity, communion, baptism, tabernacles, human sexuality? What do you think? Whatever the issue is. But you know, Jesus never talks like that. I don't know what it is about our culture, about much of Christianity, but it seems like a lot of the Christians I know are just so overwhelmed with being this heady thinking people. I mean, think about the reasons why churches break apart. It's usually over so-called theological issues, right? Like, I don't agree with you on this issue, and so I can't be with you anymore. Or, you're so wrong about this thing I think, and I can't worship with you any longer. There's a church here in our Aliquippa community that I recently found out that they were leaving their larger denomination because of some issues. And so for the heart of me, this is like a hot button topic for me, leaving churches, leaving denominations. I find the whole idea of creating a new church denomination and disassociating with others like really un-Jesus-like. So nonetheless, I listened to this person tell me this story about why their church just had to leave from being associated with other Christians. And to be honest, I couldn't understand what the issue was. And later I remember thinking to myself, what would Jesus say about this idea of separating because of what we think about an issue? If Jesus were in some of our American churches and hearing another diatribe on like the right way to think about things, I'm pretty sure he would run out yelling, "I don't want to use my head." Jesus wants us to use ears. Jesus wants us to use eyes. He wants faith and belief to be something that is done, something that can be seen and heard and changes lives. Now, granted, restoring sight to the blind is pretty tough for us, right? Unless you're an optometrist. Helping the deaf people to hear, pretty tough unless you're an audiologist. We'd all love to participate in whatever way we could possibly do to make Jeff get out of his wheelchair and stand up and dance in this space, wouldn't we? But the truth is, we literally can't do a lot of the things Jesus says there, right? But what if Jesus doesn't mean those things literally? What if when Jesus talks about the blind seeing, he means for us to be people who are opening people's eyes to God in their midst, pointing to the beauty of the world or justice happening, and saying, that's it. That's God at work. What if when Jesus talks about helping the deaf hear, he's talking about offering words to people that aren't dark, terrifying, scary, but rather being people who speak words of affirmation, words of love, of peace, and hope. And the last thing Jesus says to these followers of John, these petitions, he says that they're to go or to look for the good news to the poor, right? The good news to the poor. It's sort of a summation phrase. I mean, that's what Jesus is all about. Back to that preview for chapter 11, that's all Jesus has been about. Good news to the poor. Good news to all people. Blessed are who? Good news to those who need it. And I pray that you would be people who are followers of Jesus not by your heads, not by what you think, but by what you do. I don't want you to use your head. Well, maybe a little bit, but use the rest of your body too. Amen.